This is the second of our series of the Adult Wellness Club. We're going to hear this morning in the usual format with a few words from Rabbi Reich, and then we'll lead on to hear from our two magnificent speakers in keeping of the theme of Markai. So last time it was Dr. Sam Marcus. This time we have Dr. Suzanne Marcus, and we have a Megan Marcus. Suzanne has had over 40 years of experience in private practice as a clinical psychologist, and she will share her personal insights today on how we can best deal with the unique difficulties of the pandemic based on her extensive experience in private practice. Megan Marcus, of course, is a leader in the field of education, having developed conceptually from the ground up and built a nonprofit that is dedicated to developing emotionally intelligent educators who build relationship-driven schools. And most recently, she produced an 8-part video training series, which deals specifically with the subject that we're speaking about today, which is really building resilience and dealing with the kids and the teachers coming back to school during COVID. So, with that introduction, we'll turn it over to Rabbi Reich. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks so much, Brian. And wow, it is amazing the level of scholarship and experience that we have presenting today on the topic of resilience. I am very much looking forward. Brooke also is very much looking forward. We put the baby in actually a little bit early for his nap, just so that Brooke would be able to join us. So she should be here in just a minute. But I just want to share just a few words, basically to put into context of how important of a topic resilience is, specifically through the prism of Torah and through our history. You know, when you read through the Torah, and Rabbi Wein talks about this a lot, that, you know, there are a lot of stories in the Torah, and there are stories of great triumphant, like we read in this past week's parsha, stories of being ungrateful, as we found in this past week's parsha. After crossing the sea, we see also that it was not good conditions, and we complained. And there are a lot of stories in the Torah with different themes and different messages, but there are also these, you know, meta themes that are found in the Torah. And if you look through specifically the prism of the historical characters, the patriarchs and matriarchs of our collective story, you find that an overarching theme surrounding all of them is this sense of resilience. And we can go through literally every single character, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, after all the trials and tribulations that they each experienced. You go through each of the imahos, each of our great matriarchs, go through what Miriam had to experience, the sister of Moshe, watching her brother being taken from, and just there is literally an endless amount to speak about when we are discussing how each of the characters of the Torah dealt with trials, tribulations, difficulties, and yet grew stronger from each of those trials and tribulations, aka resilience. But I think that the number one character, if we needed to summarize and put resilience and give a face to one of the amazing characters that we find in our Tanakh that really exemplified resilience, I think no one more than Sarah Imenu, Sarah, our great matriarch, exemplifies resilience like she does. Sarah had a most difficult life. Anyone can see from just reading the basic text of the Torah over, you know, the parshios of in the beginning of Bereshis, Lech Lecha, Vayera, Chaye Sarah, and you read through the story of Sarah, the troubles that Sarah had were numerous. First, she had to travel far away. Then there was a famine. She was kidnapped. And then she was kidnapped. She was kidnapped twice. Experienced years of being barren and childless. Finally, by the grace of God, Sarah gives birth to a boy. However, not long after that, Yishmael, the son of the concubine Hagar, began to have a terrible influence on Isaac, her son. And the situation was so bad that Yishmael and his mother Hagar actually needed to be sent away from the home, literally just to save Isaac's life. Then she hears that her only precious child was being brought as a sacrifice to God. I mean, she didn't even live long enough to find out that at the end of the story, Isaac was not sacrificed and it was just a test. And I mean, talk about difficulties. And yet, Rashi quotes at the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, when we begin to recount the aftermath after the life of Sarah, Rashi says that our rabbis teach us that Sarah's life was kulan shavin latova. They were all good. What, you out of your mind? It's like they completely ignored the entire text of the Torah. Sarah's life was good? How's it possible that Sarah's life was good? We just listed all these absurd things that happened to Sarah Imenu that if it happened to any one of us would be crushed from it. So the answer is Sarah's resilience. That Sarah was able to take each and every one of these trials and tribulations in her life and put it and pack it under the package of belief that everything comes from God, a sense of that I'm fortitude by my beliefs, I'm fortitude by my faith, I'm fortitude by my family, I'm fortitude through my connections. That packaged itself into a sense of resilience that despite everything she was faced with, no matter what, Kulan Shavan Latova, they all came back to being good years. So I think that we right now, in what we're experiencing with these COVID shutdowns and the fact that we're coming onto a year now, Purim was the last time we had a large gathering together, right? So we're coming onto a year and we know it's going to end up being more than a year. That it's, I think, so timely and so appropriate that we have two experts, Dr. Suzanne Marcus and Megan Marcus, who both in their own fields and two different aspects of teaching resilience, Suzanne to specific clients, Megan on a much broader scale, helping teachers educate children and in order to encourage resilience. I think that these are two very, very important aspects, so timely that I don't want to take any more of their time. I want to just turn it over to them in order so that we can gain these insights into resilience, into building them into our own lives. So without further ado, I turn the virtual mic, the virtual stage over to I guess I'll let Suzanne and Megan decide between the two of them who's going to be presenting first.
It is Suzanne.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. It's so nice to see everybody without masks. Makes a big difference. We can all smile and we can connect with one another, which in these times has been very difficult. I just wanted to reflect a little as you were speaking about my life on our history. And I was thinking about, as a Jewish people, we, over the past 2,000 years, really have had so much adversity. We've been scattered, we've been dispersed, we've not had a home, we've not had rights, we've been uprooted over and over, and constantly lived with uncertainty. We've never known if we or our children would have to uproot and move to another country and start all over again. Yet we survived. We became stronger, and in many cases we thrived. We established the state of Israel, and Jewish life is thriving in the diaspora. So we obviously, as a people, like our forefathers and foremothers, know and have learned how to bounce back from difficulties. And actually, we only learn resilience really through facing challenges. So we have a history of adversity, and as a people, we have amazing in developing resilience. And to put it simply, we've been given lemons and we figure out how to make lemonade wherever we go. So today we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Bouncing back, finding a way in difficult circumstances to change course, finding meaning by discovering what is within your control and what is beyond your control. The only thing that we know as a people and as individuals now is that we have uncertainty, we have change. So the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. The only thing that is certain right now is that we're dealing with transitions and change. Yet we have coped and we have thrived through building resilience. So I want to just kind of reflect with you on the kinds of challenges that we have faced. Then we will talk about tools for building resilience. We'll be going back and forth. So the past 10 months, obviously, have been challenging for all of us in so many ways. And we've had three major challenges, more, but let me put it in three different ways. We've lived with uncertainty, we've lived with isolation, and we've lived with fear and anxiety. And I'll reflect on each of them. So living with uncertainty, when are we going to get back to normal? When is Shul going to be back to normal? That we can meet inside. From week to week, from month to month, we're dealing with those questions. What can we plan for? Many of us and many of you have not been able to see relatives, have not been able to travel, have not been able to hold and hug your family members. Many have not been able to plan for major milestones. How do you plan a wedding, right? How do you visit somebody who is sick? How do you help people? How does a person with a medical illness deal with that without having the comfort of a family member be able to go into a hospital with them? When are we going to celebrate holidays together in the same kind of way? And with uncertainty comes a great deal of loss of control. And that is the thing that is most distressing to us because we cannot plan for anything. Secondly, isolation. We're living in a very abnormal situation of isolation. Many of us have had to isolate from family and friends, perhaps repeatedly quarantine. We're not able to connect with our family members in the same kind of way. We're not able to be with our community. All of these resources, and they're tremendous resources, have been disrupted. Because after all, we are social creatures. We are not meant to be separated from our family, our friends, and our community. This is a hugely essential resource that helps us get through life challenges, difficulties, and uncertainties. Even having to wear a mask is very difficult because we cannot read nonverbal responses. We can't smile at people, and smiling and connecting is part of our general well-being. So we cannot read their nonverbals, we can't smile, we hardly can be friendly to people, and if we are, it's through a muffled mask if we're in the grocery store. And then we take a walk and we notice that people have fear on their face. I've noticed that if I taking a walk outside and I'm approaching from a very good social distance, somebody, and I don't have a mask on and they do, oh my goodness, the fear on their face. And then I'm with Brian and I say, put on your mask, only because I see fear on the other person's face. So these are trying times for us and we don't have our usual resources. So not only do we live with uncertainty, but we feel out of control because we cannot plan, we cannot connect with others easily. And in any case, this is, even without COVID, this has been called in the age of anxiety. We have immense change in our life all the time, technologically, in every single way. So now we have the pandemic, and our life has been turned upside down, 360 degrees. So with that comes fear. We fear for the health of ourselves, we fear for the health of our family, our friends, we fear strangers in the supermarket. We have fears of surviving financially, health-wise, politically, emotionally, and the news we are fed is bad. It is not good news, it's bad, and it's bad news for us. Unfortunately, the more news we watch, the more anxious we get, because the images we see are global, they're local, they're national, and we're overwhelmed. So that's the first thing I'm going to encourage you to do, is to really restrict your news watching, because it really makes us feel out of control. It really makes us feel helpless and helpless and highly anxious. So it reinforces our fears, and we need to do the opposite. So we have lemons, and we have to figure out how we're going to make lemonade, and what are the tools to do that. So let's shift gears now to focus on the fact that we all have resilience in different ways. And I want to invite you in the next hour to rediscover and be reminded that you do have individual resources and you do have personal strengths. And I like to think about resilience as a way of just bouncing back from difficulties, finding new meaning and discovering what is within your control. So at this time, I'm going to invite Megan Marcus to talk about trauma, talk about resilience, what it is, and begin to discuss ways that we can build resilience. And then I'll talk later in more detail about specific coping tools. Megan?
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see what's on my screen right now? Green. Okay, great. So with that introduction, it was a great kind of echoing of what a lot of us have been experiencing over the last year. And I bet many of you may be worried about what the last few months, what the last year have done to your own physical health, your psychological health, your emotional health, perhaps those of your children, your friends, your grandchildren. Simply put, we are worried about the impact of trauma and toxic stress. So I want to spend a little bit of time defining these terms, because they are very critical to understand in order to understand resilience, how to move through trauma and toxic stress. So starting with trauma refers to highly stressful experiences and the long-term harmful effects of those experiences. So it might include a one-time event like a car accident, witnessing a death or a natural disaster, or more prolonged stressors like being in an abusive or neglectful home, experiencing racism, losing a caregiver, living in poverty, or certainly a global pandemic. Trauma often includes experiences of shock, threat, overwhelm, or powerlessness. It leaves us feeling helpless, vulnerable, or very frightened. When we do encounter trauma, what happens is our brains and our bodies launch a stress response to defend against whatever threat we might be facing. You've probably heard of fight, flight, or a lesser known one, freeze. And this stress response, there we go. This stress response is kind of like pushing on the gas. It gives our bodies quick energy to deal with whatever threat is in front of us. So then if that's our stress response and it's a helpful and adaptive thing, then what is toxic stress? Well, toxic stress occurs when our body's stress response, which functions very effectively in small doses, is activated excessively. Let's think about this for a minute. Short experiences of high stress can be well handled, right? Like the body, that example of a runner, right? That's a stressful experience running a marathon like that. And what happens is our brains and bodies are actually designed to quickly go into fight or flight. What happens is our muscles tense up, our heart rate speeds up. But when the stressor goes away and when we feel safe again, our bodies quickly and easily return to a resting state. Then there are low to moderate levels of stress or arousal. And that's actually where learning and neuroplasticity happens. That's when you're stimulated enough that you're not bored, yet safe and calm enough that you can focus and perform without worrying about threat. Hopefully you're a little bit in that state right now. But what happens when we or our children are exposed to repetitive and prolonged high levels of stress? Examples of this include adverse childhood experiences, like those outside of the home, such as community violence, racism, living in poverty, or those inside the home, such as physical and emotional abuse, caregiver mental illness, or household dysfunction. Or, as I mentioned before, the persistent stress that we've all been under due to the pandemic. What happens here is that suddenly a bodily stress response that was designed to function very effectively in small doses is activated in an excessive and long-lasting way. And this, as you can imagine, has a wear and tear effect on the body, kind of like revving a car engine for days or weeks at a time. If we're constantly on, if we're constantly in that state of threat, of looking over our shoulders, of feeling anxious, it wears us down. And so that stress response, which again was only supposed to be this short-term quick fix to help us when we are endangered, essentially becomes embedded into our biology. Impacting our mental health, our physical health, cognitive development. It has the capacity to even shrink parts of our brain related to memory and learning, and has a strong impact on our immune system when we, of course, need our immune system to be the strongest right now. The thing is that the more threatening the event or experience, the larger the body's stress response will be, and the more potential for these types of harm. But here's why it's only potential for harm. Even when a person experiences the exact same trauma or stressor, the harmful impact on the brain, the body, and behavior and learning may be completely different. Why? That's where we want to dig in. The key factor here is whether the person has had the opportunity to develop resilience, which is essentially this capacity to bounce back like a new rubber band and recover after stress and trauma. And so given the fact that we all know we've been through so much trauma and stress, and yet we want to know how to develop resilience and mitigate that harm, let's try to understand how exactly is resilience developed in the first place. So resilience is 3 factors: a person's ability to tolerate stress, a person's access to protection during stress, and of course, the opportunity that person has to recover after stress. So let's talk about each of these factors so we can understand the impact that the stress of COVID might have had on ourselves and the people we love. First is the ability to cope with stress, known as stress tolerance. Every person has a unique tolerance for stressful or traumatic events based on their experiences, their genetics, their age, and other factors. Young children, just by and large, are not ready to tolerate large doses of stress simply because of their age and maturity. Basically, they haven't developed the self-regulation capabilities to do so. But even older children or adults may also have low stress tolerance if they have experienced excessive toxic stress. Basically, this early stress in our lifetime makes us immature or undeveloped in our abilities to tolerate it later. This is the wild thing, is that paradoxically experiencing a lot of stress makes us more sensitive to and not more tolerant of stress. Now, for the second factor is access to protection. This is essentially somewhere someone or somewhere to go to find comfort or safety versus being alone and powerless during difficult experiences. It could be a safe person to run to, a positive relationship with a nurturing caregiver, or very often a caring educator. Every person has different opportunities for and experiences with this kind of protection and shelter. And finally, the third factor, the opportunity to recover from stress. We bounce back from stressful experiences more readily when we can let go of that stress through physical movement, creative expression, emotional release, such as being held or crying, talking and getting the support of caring friends, teachers, or caregivers. The higher the stress tolerance, the protection, and the recovery opportunities a person has in the face of stress, the more likely it is that they will bounce back. On the other hand, if a person lacks stress tolerance, lacks protection, and lacks recovery opportunities, even seemingly small stressors may create significant stress. Thankfully, just as the brain adapts to danger and can be harmed, the brain can also adapt to safety and be healed. Many people think the brain is formed in infancy or childhood and then stops changing, but in actuality, the brain changes throughout the lifespan and is constantly rewiring itself in response to experiences. And that the brain's ability to change itself in that way is called neuroplasticity. So while we may be worried about the damage that all this stress has done to ourselves, our health, our brains, and those around us, the most important question for us to ask today is, how do we want our brains to change in the coming months? And how can we create a path for promoting resilience and recovery? The powerful thing is that healing begins in relationships where we feel seen, safe, and soothed. Research has shown that just one supportive relationship can provide a protective buffer in the wake of trauma and stress, activating changes in the brain that promote safety, resilience, and new learning. And so while unresolved trauma causes the body to stay stuck, the help of a secure, caring relationship, a person then learns, not only can I move from this distressed state to calm, but I can depend on relationships in the future to help me do this. Incredibly, a safe relationship creates resilience in the present and incredibly stores resilience away for the future. So now I'm going to talk about a few ways that you can activate this idea in your own life, these safe relationships that really build resilience. Especially in times of crisis, humans are social creatures who feel seen, safe, and soothed in relationships. A researcher called Lisa Eberson calls this act of sticking together during stress the flocking response. It's actually a lesser known stress response that when we're stressed out, instead of going to fight, flight, or freeze, something we can do is flock, which is essentially huddling up with those we love rather than running away or fighting back. And in this way, when you're thinking of building your own resilience, you have to remember resilience is relational. How can I flock in order to get through this? Here are a few ways that you can think about flocking for yourself. Attending individual or group therapy to help process the stress and essentially have a safe person to speak to. Use relationship rituals with those in your life, such as amping up saying, I love you, or making sure that you're sharing meals together. Creatively connecting with new and old friends. This is a great time to connect with people around the world who you might not normally see because folks are more used to using Zoom. And something you can do is play games over Zoom with people who are local or at a distance. Reach out and ask for help if you need it, making yourself vulnerable so that you can invite in that relationship and that help. Play, laugh, and engage in joyful experiences with loved ones. And finally, tell your story. This is another really powerful way to promote healing. When we can make sense of our own narratives of the last several months and the last year, that coherence actually promotes a coherence in our story, promotes a coherence in our brain, and a better self-regulation moving forward. Not only can you use relationships to build your own resilience, but the amazing thing is we each have the power to promote resilience and healing in other people. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to basically be someone who builds resilience with for those you love around you. The most powerful way to help someone in your life build resilience through relationships is with something called empathy. We usually think about empathy about putting yourself in another person's shoes, But at my organization, we talk about really putting empathy into action through communication. So how we're defining it here is empathy is our ability to understand another person's perspective and then take it one step further by verbally communicating that understanding. It's also known as mirroring. Something to watch out for when you're starting to practice empathy is empathy blockers. These are really well-intentioned statements that might communicate judgment rather than understanding by shifting the attention away from the person needing to be heard. And you'll recognize these because we talk to each other like this all the time without realizing the way in which it can be a little dismissive. So communicating with empathy does not sound like silver lining the problem. Look on the bright side, it's not on the end of the world. At least you have, your parents locally and you can still see them from time to time. Problem solving. Have you tried doing this? You should do this. Did you get that kind of mask? Or maybe you could just meet in the park and have the bar mitzvah there, right? Just kind of trying to find the solution instead of really deeply listening. And then finally interrogating. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? So next time someone comes to you with something they're feeling, something they're experiencing, they're in a state of dysregulation, try instead using these sentence stems. It sounds like you're feeling really overwhelmed. You must be needing this pandemic to just be over. I'm hearing you say that you're really frustrated, that you can't see your grandchildren. You must have felt really alone, right? This is just going to give that person that space to essentially feel what they're feeling and therefore be able to release it. The most amazing thing about empathic listening is that it actually creates an invitation into a safe relationship where someone can then tell their story. And both of these elements, feeling like you have a safe person to go to feel seen and soothed, and having the opportunity to make sense of your story, are actually the most powerful ingredients for healing trauma and building resilience. And each of us carry that within ourselves to do for one another. So that's what my hope is, for us to utilize and build stronger relationships so that we can promote resilience in ourselves and one another in our community. I'm going to kick it back to my mom now. Oh, excuse me, Dr. Marcus now, so that she can share more strategies for building resilience. Oh, you're muted. Just on the bottom left of the screen. That's mute.
Okay, back. Okay, Megan really focused on one of the key ingredients in resilience, and that is focusing on relationships. It's foundational. But I'm going to just expand, and I want you to think about resilience as having 3 R's. The first one, relationships. How are we connecting with other people? How are we bringing people into our lives? And it's not natural right now to actually think about doing that. I've noticed that, one would think that in a psychology practice right now, and I've spoken to my colleagues, that we'd be flooded with clients, but we're actually not. Everyone is down because people withdraw, they freeze, they tend not to reach out, and you have to consciously make an effort to do those relationship things that Megan's spoken about. So the first one, relationships. The second R is routine. What daily routines do you create for yourself? That helps us build a sense of control, because when we're living in a place and space where we don't feel in control, having small daily routines helps. So it's relationships, it's routine, and it's rest. So I'm going to start with the basic rest. You have to think about, to what extent are you paying attention to your sleep? It's very important for your immunity. To what extent are you paying attention to your nutrition, to self-care? So rest includes all aspects of physical well-being. it's probably the most important thing you can be doing during the pandemic. It also incorporates just how do we self-regulate. And I think that was alluded to, is that you have to be able to deal with your stress response and be able to recover from it. And I'm going to share with you a possible and a tool that I think is most powerful. And that is, you can change your physiology, you can change your stress response immediately to recover if you will use simple technique of slowing down the breath. And I'm going to ask you to just experience that for right now. We'll just take a minute to do that. Take a moment and on a scale from 1 to 10, just decide, with 10 being the greatest level of stress that one could be in, and 1 being the most relaxed. What number, and you don't have to share this, just make a note of it in your mind, what number would you say you were at this point? 10 being the most stressed, and 1 being the least, most relaxed. When you've got that number, then we're going to just simply, I'm going to show you a breathing technique for you to slow it down, and then we'll decide how we're feeling after that. So the key to slowing down the breath is the ratio of inhaling to about the count of 3 or 4, and then we'll pause for a second or 2, and then we'll have a longer exhalation. So your exhalation should be twice as long as your inhalation. So if it's 3 in, it's 6 out. If it's 4 in, it's 8 out. Okay. When you breathe, and I'm going to show you first, listen to the sound of your breath, and you can begin to create just an imagery of perhaps listening to the sound, the breath becoming like the sound of a wave coming in and a wave going out. And we'll take about maybe several breaths here. So I'll show you first. So breathing in, pausing, and then exhaling. I'm going to make a sound so you can breathe with me. So close your eyes. No one's going to be looking at their screen. So take a moment then to close your eyes and breathing in, pausing and exhaling. Breathing in, pausing and exhaling. Pay attention to the sound and feel of the breath as it comes in, and allow the breath to become like the sound of a wave coming in, and a wave slowly going out, and a wave coming in, and a wave gently going out. And of course, your mind will be busy, and that's normal. So just put your chattering monkey on the sidelines with a sense of humor and come back to listening to the rhythm and sound of the breath as it comes in and as it slowly goes out. There's nothing you have to do right now, and there's nothing you have to say. You can just allow yourself to come back to focusing on the sound and feel of the breath as if nothing else existed. That's it. Breathing in and out automatically. That's right. Just taking the time to do that now. That's it. And then letting yourself come on back to the room. Noting that when you breathe in, you can imagine a sense of calm. And when you breathe out, you can blow out any unnecessary tension, just letting it go. So take a little reading now. If you would do a minute or two of that 2 or 3 times a day, you would be actually creating some tremendous physiological changes in the body. And just slowing down the breath is proven to be one of the most powerful tools of self-regulation. We do it when we do yoga, but when you take a walk, it can also be done as a walking state. So now evaluate from 1 to 10 and see if perhaps you've seen a slight change. Maybe it's a half a point, maybe it's 1 point. But I think what it will tell you is that there is something you can actually do to allow yourself to recalibrate. And that's the most important thing, because we cannot change what's going on around us, but we certainly can change something that's going on within us. So we did something very ordinary, but if it possibly changed a feeling of feeling more compressed, a little bit more stressed, even if it made us feel a little bit more calm inside, it gave us a sense that we can be a little bit more in control in a world where we feel things are not in our control. And it also allows us to know that we can bounce back difficult circumstances in the moment and know that it's something we can do to move forward. So I encourage you to use this breathing tool frequently throughout the day, not only when you notice that you're feeling stressed, but really to practice it. The resilience tools that we really need to use are things that if we do them frequently, resilience is like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets. The more we're able to reach out to people and connect and be seen and feel soothed, we build resilience. The more we establish routines in our daily life, and they can be very simple. 5 minutes of exercise every day, 10 minutes of exercise at about the same time, eating meals together, reaching out and connecting with people and having that in your schedule, having a specific sleep time and wake up time, having in your routine for pleasurable hobbies and making time for that, because you have been through difficult times in the past and you've come through it, and you really have to think about what was it that really helped soothe you. Was it journaling? Was it writing? Was it doing creative things like art or listening to music? Doing more of those things on a daily basis, even for a short amount of time, is going to be immensely helpful. So we have daily routine, building relationships, and your physiological self-care. So I want to draw this to some kind of conclusion. We spoke in the beginning about the lessons that we learned in the past, and we certainly can draw from survivors of the Holocaust. What gave them the courage to get through those horrific experiences? How did we as a people move through that? Some kept their faith and others did not. But the most important thing is they did not give up their faith in life and living. Viktor Frankl is a survivor was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he founded a new school of therapy. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, in the camps, everything was taken away that made us human, except the one thing that can never be taken away. And that one thing is the freedom to decide how to respond. And how did he survive? He survived by refusing to see himself as a prisoner. So I want to invite this opportunity now for question and answers. And our moderator will bring up the questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Marcus and Megan Marcus. They were very, very enlightening and well prepared and just packed with a lot of information. The one question that has been posed right here, and I think this is one to be addressed to Megan. She wrote that resilience is shaped by stress tolerance, access to protection, opportunity to recover. Yet she also mentioned that stress tolerance means that the more stress, the worse your resilience. However, Suzanne, Dr. Marcus mentioned that resilience is a muscle. So you have to exercise your resilience. So how do you exercise your resilience? By not putting yourself under more stress. That seems like one good way to exercise resilience, to get more resilient. So Megan, if you would answer that, we would appreciate that.
I will just clarify. You exercise your resilience tools.
Okay.
I'll frame it a bit. So as I said before, experiencing a lot of stress makes us more sensitive to, not more tolerant of stress, unless the caveat is, unless your experiences of stress, you had those ability to tolerate stress, access to protection, and opportunities to recover. So it's not that stress does wear us down if you don't have those opportunities. But if you do, the more stress you experience in the wake of protection and in the wake of relationships and in the wake of those protective factors, it actually can strengthen your resilience. So it is a bit of a paradox. And I think it does come down to whether or not you do have those three factors that shape resilience in your life. Which is to why Dr. Marcus said, the more you practice, not necessarily practice being stressed, but the more you activate these tools, resilient relationships, rest, and routine in the face of resilience, in the face of stress, the more you can build resilience.
There's another quick, that really clarifies it a lot. I appreciate that. So what you're saying is that as long as you have the other protections and opportunities recover, dealing with additional stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. Rabbi Reich has a question here. How do you build resilience in younger kids that sometimes seem to be very defiant?
So I think that the idea of building resilience in children, it sometimes takes us for a loop because, and I see this happen in education where like, we want to build children with resilience. We want to build grit. And so oftentimes teachers then say, okay, let's do a unit on grit or resilience. Let's teach them how to do it in this very didactic way. And the primary thing I want everyone to walk away with today is the way you build resilience in others is not by teaching resilience or preaching resilience, but by listening and being there for somebody, creating a safe space so they can air out the challenges that they've experienced, their story, their feelings, is the number one way that we can actually build inner resources in our children. It's very similar to how regulation theory tells us that co-regulation precedes self-regulation. So if you think about an infant, they have no capacity to care for themselves, right? Every cry, every dirty diaper, every scream has to be tended to by an adult caregiver. That experience of time after time, a baby being soothed, eventually they can learn how to soothe themselves. And very similarly, that's the same thing that we're thinking about here. If you want your children to be able to, as they grow up, become people who can handle stress, weather a storm, you have to think about how you give them opportunities to co-regulate. when they're distressed, not letting them be alone in the stress, but actually sitting with them, listening to them, letting them feel heard and be seen, so that ultimately they can tell themselves, I can handle this, as opposed to us saying, you can handle this. The way they get the inner message of I can handle this is when we say to them, this is really hard and you're really struggling. Over time, the more they can hear their own inner voice, the more they can recognize, yeah, this is really hard and I'm really struggling, but I'm going to be okay. They tell themselves that story. Do you want to add anything, Dr. Marcus?
No, I think you did a great job.
I guess, would that answer the question about can resilience be taught? It sort of leads into the same, somebody raised that question, and it's really not what you were saying, Megan, was that it's not really a taught thing. It's really more of a mirroring thing.
I like the word developed, because it can be developed, it can be grown, but it's not a directive. It's not a skill that you learn like you're going to learn math or reading or writing. It's something that unfolds and grows and develops in the context of a relationship.
I think that there is a small genetic predisposition to resilience. And I think you can see that because you take people in traumatic circumstances like the Holocaust, and some thrived better than others. I mean, that's an awful experiment, but that is true. But it doesn't mean that you cannot learn how to move through these challenging and difficult times. So it is definitely something that can be developed and learned.
And I think the things that can be taught, or the things that we taught today, for example, if you want to teach your children more resilience, the things like the 3 R's are something that you can teach very explicitly. Okay, how can we make sure you're getting enough rest? What kind of routines do we want to build into your day? What relationships are we going to rely on? Those are the things that can be taught, which are essentially tools to utilize in the face of stressful experiences that will promote more resilience.
Right. So I have a follow-up question to, this volley that you guys are having about building resilience, which is, Dr. Marcus, you mentioned about, looking at the way that Holocaust survivors had built resilience in their own lives, learning from them is helpful. I think that just one aspect of the challenge, though, is that when you're in the thick of it, right now we're this has become our new reality, right? So it's almost on some level a little easier to deal with the stress and the trauma right now, just because we've kind of settled into this. Well, it's now normal to be experiencing trauma. But when there's a new trauma that hits, so when you're in the thick of it, it's very, very difficult to just self-regulate, in this automatic kind of sense at that moment, especially when you also need to help, let's say, as Brooke mentioned before, your kids. So you're dealing with it, and at the same time, you need to teach that resilience to your children through empathy and listening, etc. So I would assume there isn't like, some pill you just take, or, of like, okay, I need to just regulate right now. That's not an option, right? So what can one do in order to build the resilience to the point that when the trauma hits, you're ready for it? And
well, I think that
to your kids.
What was that last part, Rabbi Ray?
Sorry, and then meaning you can deal with it, and then at the same time be able to also be there for your kids.
it's very difficult to be present and to problem solve and to be there for somebody else when you're feeling very dysregulated. So that's an important awareness, to be thinking that you should have some compassion for yourself. We should have compassion for ourselves when we're in a state like that. So that's the first thing to recognize. And then we do have to really focus on what do we need to do to find a way to soothe ourselves, because we cannot help others until we have self-regulated. And I know the tool that I offered today is a very simple one, but it's extremely powerful. If you're feeling dysregulated, the most important thing you can do is to focus on self-regulation. And physiological self-regulation is the first key, because you cannot think straight, you can't problem solve, and you can't be empathic and help anybody else when your body is, when you're feeling highly stressed. So just leaving the room, taking some time out, 3 to 5 minutes is a minimum, or taking a time out to be able to tell your partner that you really are out of it and you need them to take over. You just need to be able to recognize that you have to take care of yourself in that way, and allow yourself to move through it. And in addition to that, connecting with somebody and sharing, not keeping that to yourself, will also reinforce that you can get through it. We do not need to be alone in this. We all need to be able to connect to others.
Well, we're coming up to 1 hour now. Does anyone have any last questions before we sign off for today? Firstly, would like to thank Dr. Marcus and Rabbi Reich and Megan for all the wonderful insight that we've learned today. I'll certainly take a minute to breathe deeply now and get myself a lot more relaxed and de-stressed. I'll also remember to overcome the problems that stressful situations through relationship, routine, and rest. And I understand that stress tolerance can be exercised as long as you have access to protection and an opportunity to recover. It's been a wonderful presentation, and we have our Sarah Imenu to look to as someone who overcame just the worst kinds of situations, as well as lessons from the Holocaust. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for attending the Adat Wellness Club. We'll be doing this every month on the last Sunday of every month, and we look forward to hearing from other experts in our community. And thank you all so much for attending, and once again to all the presenters here today.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I want to say my gratitude to everybody that shares here. And it is amazing what you do. And it was wonderful, and a lot of beautiful and easy tips, good communication, and a lot of positive thinking. The thoughts that they are positive, they make also that our bodies will be healthy, and that we will have the will of power to go forward. Doesn't matter the age. The thing is to believe in God that everything will be better, and each day to make ourselves the most positive and the most being in contact with Hashem and with our good friends, even though by phone. It is so easy only to say a good word, and everyone loves to hear a good word, and everyone needs to be to know that somebody cares to the other. And it is amazing what I heard, and I want to say my gratitude to everybody. Suzanne, Megan, and President, and Rabbi, and everybody. Thank you.
You're an inspiration, Bella.
Bella.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Susan, Megan,
Thank you, Bella. You're the best.
Brian, everybody, Rabbi. God
Bella,
bless
you
God
mentioned
bless you.
You mentioned something very important. If we each, every day, did 3 messages of gratitude to ourselves about what happened that day, we would actually change our whole way of thinking. But that's actually in the research of positive psychology. So you reminded me of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Love you, love you.
Love you, Bella.